Welcome to the next edition of Trendspotting. My name is Shashank Veera, and I'm from the Hearth Advisors, and I'm introducing this event. Normally, the Habitat Center gives this welcome, but this was a special one, and I wanted to introduce it myself. We're very grateful to this collaboration with the Habitat Center, which brings once a month interesting conversations to the habitat. Now, what we're trying to do at Trendspotting is to explore nuanced gray area conversations. Right? So we're not trying to find a right and wrong. We're not trying to find one answer to a complicated question. We're trying to explore the idea so that hopefully you leave this evening better informed than when you came in. And if that happens, it's been an evening well spent. Right? So without much ado, may I request the panelists to join me up here and we can get started. Can I request if you could just turn your phones to silent or vibrate so that we don't have them going off in the middle of the discussion. Right? So I'd like to introduce the panelists very quickly, and very quickly I'll introduce the topic and we'll get going. We're not big ones for garlands and flowers, as you can see, but to my extreme right is Amit Pastricha. Amit is a photographer, right? And he's not just a photographer, right? He does these wonderful things called panoramas, and he's a panoramist, right? And what he also does is something very interesting, which is he looks and finds lost monuments, right? And there's something called India Lost and Found, and we'll talk a little bit about it, about how it weaves into living heritage, right, on it. And that's a very interesting interplay of technology with culture, with photography and history. Swapna Middle on my right is a historian, but she's a little bit more than a historian. She was asked some 25 years ago as to, Swapna, why don't you do a walk for us, right, on it, right here in the Habitat Center? And she said, no, historians don't do walks. Right? Historians, we study history. Right? We don't do walks. Famous last words. Swapna has been, for the last 25 years, actually weaving culture, history, monuments, life, living heritage, and bringing it to people who aren't historians. Right? On my left is Alison Barrett. Right? Now, Alison technically is the country director of the British Council, but she's not here because she's that. She's here because very early in her career, she decided that she's going to trek around Nepal and Japan and where? South Korea, teaching English to people who didn't know English. Right, on it. And that began a love affair with Southeast Asia, South Asia, which has lasted to this day with her and her kids and her family. And anything that's connected with heritage, you're likely to find Alison there. Right? So much so that she 3 books herself sometimes. And so welcome, Alison. And to the extreme left is Olga Chepeslanskaya, and I've always got her name wrong for the last 20 years, you know it, who's a very interesting mix of an architect, an urban planner, right? She's also a Kathak dancer, right? And she lives in Thailand right now, but every 3 months if you check, she's probably in a different country. It was Vietnam before that, Barcelona before that, India before that, and France before that. So, she travels the world and brings the perspective of living heritage in the work she's done for international organizations as an architect, as an urban planner. Now, the topic today is living heritage. Right? Now, I'm not going to talk too much about it because you haven't come here to listen to me. You've come to listen to these wonderful panelists on both sides of me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by asking them to unpick what living heritage means to them. Is it only about that nice, lovely monument that you see behind us? Is it only about buildings? Is it about people? Right? So what's living heritage? So Swapna, why don't I begin with you?
Thank you so much, Shashank, and for having me on this very, I think, important panel with such wonderful co-panelists. Living heritage. Let's just talk about heritage. For me, heritage means historic neighborhoods. And I am particularly interested in historic neighborhoods, and some of them are around monuments as well, which are recognized as monuments, but they are generally historic neighborhoods. It is about definitely sustainable livelihoods around those monuments. It's about other kinds of living traditions like crafts, like textile manufacture, whatever, all those kind of things. So definitely very much living what we call intangible heritage often, and as well as the tangible spaces in which these are often moored. So I'd say these are the things around which heritage moves for me, and for me that historical aspect is very much there. But then how we look back at that historical, how we move forward with that.
And so I'm going to take something that you said to you, Alison, to talk about something from your background about how do languages weave into heritage, right? And what's the interplay of languages and heritage?
Yeah. So yes, for living heritage for me means all of those things that Swapna just said, and thank you also for inviting me this evening. I'm happy to be here. But for me, it's also about anything that helps us understand who we are, where we've come from, what we've learned from where we've come from, and where we're going. And nothing better than language that really embodies that understanding and that sort of cultural perspective. And so it's no accident that we call languages heritage languages, for example. So, languages help us understand past generations. They help us have a sense of place. Even if we move around the world, our language keeps us rooted with our communities and with our families and our histories. It helps us communicate what we believe in and our values, which I think are really strong parts of heritage. And I think language also helps us understand other people and be more tolerant, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, I'm going to come back to some of these, but I'm going to take it to you, Amit, because I'm quickly moving to the four of you to get the initial comments and then move on. When Swapna and Alison have talked about living heritage as a continuum of a sort, where you're linking up the past with the present and looking into the future. Right? When you come in as you take literally a snapshot. Right? You're taking a slice of time. Right? So how does photography taking slices of time, right, reflect living heritage?
Thanks for having me here. It's the whole idea of immortalizing something. I think is a very important aspect, because everything is ephemeral, moving ahead, morphing. Particularly when you look at habitats, homes particularly, they're constantly evolving, changing. Look at all our urban homes. We just sort of junk everything that has been possibly collected for generations and adopt a new lifestyle at the drop of a hat. And all that, if it's not put together and documented well, monuments may stay longer, but all that in which a huge amount of the intangible traditions and lie are going to disappear very fast. And as it is, you realize that youngsters today have very little idea of what these tehsil or kasbah towns or tier 2 cities really hold today also. So I think photography plays a very important role therein for all this.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to bring you in now, Olga, and ask you a question, which is a bit of a leading question on living heritage. There's an assumption in what the other three have said right now about some kind of linearity between the past, the present, and then leading into the future, saying preserve the memories, either through history, photography, languages, right? You preserve the history and you preserve the memory of the history to understand your present better, and then guide your future, right? So in a sense, the future is a linear extension of your past, right on it. And I think there's a common belief that living heritage is part of that your future gets guided by the present. But it isn't always so, right, Olga? Right? That the future doesn't always have to be a linear present of the...
So linearity is, very difficult to... Oh. Thank you. Yes, you're right, Shashank. So linearity is, very difficult to define in this sense, especially now in a world where we interconnect so much. There is what you inherit from, but there is a lot what comes to you. So to me, it's maybe difficult to imagine a line, but something I would like to share when I think about what living heritage is versus just heritage. For me, it's, I would say, a rooted way of life. But that way of life is very important. For example, I've had the chance of growing up in a few cities of Western Europe, which were quite architecturally significant, such as Paris, for example. And just the fact of walking in these streets and feeling that this is your daily life. It's not something that is preserved in a museum and you go there from time to time, but this is your life as it is. And because this has this aesthetic, historical significance, it uplifts your life to another level. And now, because you live in that inspiring environment, then you can also create, and your creativity is also getting uplifted. And I think this is very important when we talk about the past and the future. Once we nourish ourselves with that beauty around us, then it gives us the opportunity to also create something that possibly we can also leave as a legacy to other generations.
And I want to take it on from there into your time you spent in Asia, right on it. Now, Asian cities can be very different to Paris, right on it. Some of them have rich monumental and architectural traditions of the past, some don't, right? And some cities around the world, not just in Asia, can be pretty dumpy old places, right on it. So how do you create a living heritage out of a place that doesn't have a Parisian or a Roman rich architectural heritage?
Yes, I think that's a very important question, and that's exactly what I felt when I moved to Asia. So I started living in Asia in 2010. That was first in Thailand, in Bangkok, and then I moved to Delhi and I spent almost 10 years here actually as well. And my work brings me to many Asian cities. And then at some point I started noticing that, I come to Kuala Lumpur, then I come to Manila, and it's not exciting. And then I realized it's not exciting because I'm seeing the same things. And I think this is a real issue because at the same time, as Alison also pointed out a little bit, Asian countries are extremely rich with cultural elements. But to me, and maybe it's personal to some extent, but I think only to some extent because anyone can feel it as well, you also need that physical surrounding that expresses that richness that you have. And when you have it in your language, in your cuisine, in your arts and crafts, but your physical environment, your urban fabric is dull, because I'm sorry, that is the word, with the concrete boxes you see all over, that immediately removes that dimension that could really inspire you and, bring you to that, other level of excitement in your life. So first I kind of was startled with that. And then I created an institution called UniCity, which stands for Uniqueness in Cities. And our mission is really to bring this uniqueness back to Asian cities, because I think there is so much Asia could give, and this is not happening. And I really feel emotional about it.
And Sapna, I'm going to get you in, right? Because you come from a rich historical tradition of looking at the multicultural nature of cities like Delhi, which you've written so much about, and how the entire cultural dimension of Delhi has changed over the last many decades, right? And there's something which is the same and something that's different, right, on it. And how would you react to what Olga just said?
I'm going to react to what Olga just said in a very, very literal sense, because I entirely agree with the feeling that, the idea that actually the space you inhabit to a large extent inspires you, influences your very being, how you live, is to a large extent influenced by the space you live in. So let me give you a very concrete example on that. Delhi has one of Delhi's most important historic neighborhoods is what we call Old Delhi, which is Shah Jahanabad, the 17th century city of Mughal Delhi, right? And that's still definitely a very much a living city. It's not a ruined fort or anything, though it has the Red Fort next to it. It has a typical sort of layout of a town of its time. It's got these narrow streets. It's got courtyard houses. Now, those courtyard houses, it's very interesting because those streets are the way the streets were planned. They are narrow streets, but the interface between the Haveli, the courtyard house, and the street is one of the interaction between the public and the private. These are not, the rest of Delhi, you go to the rest of Delhi, every road, every street is meant as a conduit for traffic. These are different. These are, in front of these old Havelis, you'll see on either side of the doorway there's a little otla. And the otla is literally meant to sit on. And the idea behind that kind of construction was that the people who live in the Haveli might sit there and have a cup of tea, read their newspaper, and they still indeed often do, and interact with the people who walk on the street. The open courtyard, which gives you, in a very otherwise compact city, gives you light and air. The terraces, the rooftop terraces, which allow you to meet your neighbors and interact with them without even having to come down to the street. All of these structures themselves, the way the streets are built, the way the houses there are constructed, are conducive to a particular kind of lifestyle. And people who, despite the fact that infrastructure is broken down and all that, some of the people, when you ask them why do you continue to stay there, they say, I have everything I need, I can just walk to it. Everything is close by, I don't have to. And think of what a wonderful way of living that is. You interact with your neighbors, whatever you need. You don't need to pick up a car and go anywhere. You just walk to it, right? So the problem is that every time one of those courtyard houses is broken, and some of them are demolished from time to time, what comes up in its place is a solid block of flats. You are finishing off that particular kind of way of living, etc. So that's why I feel so strongly about this kind of, it's a way of life, which is fostered by a particular kind of space, which we are changing, whereas we should in fact be getting lessons from this, because this is a sustainable way of living and has a better quality of life than you do in those concrete boxes.
Absolutely. So I think both Olga and you, in different ways, are actually talking about one of the central questions that we are talking about in this topic, about that progress and preservation are sometimes in conflict with each other as far as heritage is concerned. And Amit, I'm going to go to one of the series of books you did and the photography you did, where you went into people's homes. And I remember conversations with you where some of those were actually snapshots of the kind of life that Swapna is talking about, people in a community, hanging around, interacting with the community, and how the family, the home, and the community interact. Photography captures that. And at other times it was where you said it was so contrary to the life that they lived, where their daily life was jeans and t-shirts and traveling 20 miles to go to a place of work, right? And the snapshots that you were capturing were snapshots of a past that didn't exist for them, right, on it. And what has been your experience of homes and communities that Swapna is talking about?
Actually, I sort of put another spin to it. Today, is also tomorrow's heritage. So one mustn't forget that. What we are evolving is going to become archaic. 50 years later, they're going to say, wow, how did I live? What were you up to? So we must sort of look at it from a compass that, understands the larger context of what heritage is. It's a continuum, like we're saying. So it's not taking past to the future. It's taking the past to the present. And the present will take it to the future. So the present must get included. So these boxes, for me, are also, are reflective of the lives that we're living. I mean, the stresses we're adopting. A book before that was interesting, the Monumental India book. Yeah. I traveled to London, and I was sitting on BBC, and the question that got posed to me was carbon miles. How is this book is going to save the world, because people will not need to travel since the book exists, and of course, that's not going to happen, but there is a point to say that, when you talked about this conflict of, and I think, sustainable travel is a huge thing that must be sort of factored in. And so photography in a large way, and especially, what I attempt to do, which is look at this, from this widescape, is also attempting to do that, to say, hey, sit at home and experience what you can otherwise miss, because you can't be everywhere. And and of course you can be where Swapna takes you, which is wonderful.
Your own neighborhood.
No, but I'm just picking up from what you said about you don't have to travel 1,000 miles or several thousand miles if you can see it in a book read on it, and of course the experience versus the thing. But we've had these traditions in different parts of the world, India included, of where people brought the world to your village and to your town, right? And there were the wandering minstrels, the storytellers, the ball singers. I remember growing up in small town Madhya Pradesh, and the guy would come with that diorama, and you'd love that diorama because it brought the world to you, right, on it. And there was usually a candy floss wala, and it was lovely as kids to have the candy floss wala, the diorama, and the world came to your village, right? The world came to your town. So what's happening is, Alison, I'm going to take it to you, but many of these things are dying out, right, on it. So the ball singers, there are hardly any of them. The wandering storytellers, there are very few. The fakirs travel for weeks and weeks and weeks from place to place, and there's nobody who wants to listen to them, right? And so what's happening when these stories, not just through photography and books that are published, but the oral tradition, which is so much part of living heritage, right, on it, if the oral tradition itself gets lost, right, then aren't we losing something of our heritage and our living heritage?
Yeah, so just to say, I also found coming to Asian cities when I was younger just incredibly enriching and very confronting, and the fact that life happens literally on the streets, and you can walk through Old Delhi, and you feel very, well, I used to feel very connected, and like I had some sort of understanding, of course, but of course familiarity doesn't mean you understand, but it does mean that you feel closer, and it makes you curious and makes you want to understand more. So I feel Asian cities are very intriguing in that sense. One of my favorite cities is definitely Kathmandu, where I just love sitting in different parts of the city and watching the world go by. But when I grew up in a very tiny village in Dorset. And we used to have a storyteller who came every summer. His name was Uncle Stephen, and he would set up a big tent in our village, and essentially he was a Methodist preacher. And my family would sort of send me and my sister off to Uncle Stephen's tent. I don't know if they do that now, but they do. And we would sit and listen to all these stories, essentially from the Bible. And it was just the best experience, and the community would all get together. There would be my granny and my mum, and they'd come in the evenings, and we'd all, so that culture was something that I really miss about my childhood, and I think something that I feel I gain from being in many cities in Asia. And it would be a real shame if that tradition completely disappeared. And I think the importance of preserving languages and the ability to share those stories and to tell them in the languages that they were originally told to you by your grandparents or by, it is really, really important. And it would be a real shame if we lost that because we chose the wrong language at school, or we decided that kids had to learn through one particular medium of language rather than the other, or we feel that one language is more important than another. So I think preserving those choices for people is really important.
Yeah, and isn't preserving those spaces also about the spaces?
Yeah.
Right on it, and because unless you have those performance spaces, unless you have those congregation spaces, then you don't create the opportunity for people to come together, right on it. And so, Olga, how do you design for that? I mean, how do you design for modern cities to have those social spaces, right, that bring about this intangible heritage and create the kind of spaces that Swapna is talking about, or that Alison is talking about?
Right. So, yes, so first of all, to be able to contribute to that, there is a huge road to undergo, because Swapna brought in a beautiful example, and it showed really in its depth of how people build spaces in a way that replied to the local climate conditions, to the local social habits, cultural habits, and the person could really feel good in many respects in it. But today, what we face, especially in Asian cities, in fact, I was at an architectural conference a few years back, where I learned I was completely stunned that only 5% of the infrastructure, built infrastructure in India is built with the help of architects. The rest is just some engineer, basic designs, and you just go and developers just build it around. Now, there are two ways out of it. And so there is a big difference here with what used to happen. Because before, it was pretty much plot-based development. I have a small piece of land, and now I'm going to do what I want with it, and because I cannot fix my design mistakes with putting air conditioning day and night, I'm going to pay attention to the local conditions, and I'll create a comfortable space. Now, the objective of most developers, unless regulated, is to build at the lowest possible cost and sell at the highest possible price. And even there, we could meet those objectives in better ways, but often we don't bother looking at it. And now the way to address it is to bring a certain level of regulation. And there, very few countries succeed. I mean, I can quote Singapore, but that's it pretty much. Even in Europe, I can't say that we are good at it, where this regulation would be in the interest of public good. And so maybe to give you, Shashank, this idea of how we can possibly do it, what I really liked in the regulation approach of Singapore is that, first of all, they put the identity of the city country, so it's the same, at the core. So there is an identity plan, they change the names once in a while, which is first. Only then comes master planning, and so then master plan is further segregated by sectors and by neighborhoods. And then each neighborhood has its own identity and guidelines which will help you respect this identity. So, for example, I went in detail through the guidelines of Orchard Street neighborhood, which is very touristic, commercial, etc. And so it says, for example, that's common to many neighborhoods, but it says that all the facades should be open. So you cannot build, like in Malaysia, you can walk for half a kilometer, you don't, get any place for your eye to rest. But then here you can always walk in, there is a cafe, or there is something, it should be shaded. So against sun, or if it rains, the person can come and feel comfortable. There is a streetscape and roofscape, so you should also, inscribe yourself in line with that place. And very importantly and very interestingly, the guideline also says that if you don't comply with what we say, but you feel that your project will bring value to the place, please bring it to us. So this is how you don't limit creativity also. But you make sure that we don't end up with, a forest of concrete boxes where you can't even sit at a bench, or let alone having a public square. So this is, from a practitioner perspective, I think this is where we need to look at, because today the players are so big, like those who build the most of the urban fabric, of course there are exceptions to that, that we need to have that thinking from the government perspective, otherwise we can't win this war, so to say.
Yeah. And Swapna, you've seen some of these spaces in India being redeveloped. I mean, whether it's Chandni Chowk or Qutub area, various places which have which went downhill and then, in a sense, carrying that metaphor forward, are being brought uphill again. On it, what is your experience of the way planning is done in heritage areas, let's say?
Well, really, I mean, first of all, I must put a caveat there that my familiarity is with Delhi alone. I don't have, I'm not very familiar with other places. But at least in Delhi, what I see is that historic areas are not improving. I mean, if you talk about being pulled out of a state of decline, that's really not happening. Because even if you look at Chandni Chowk, it's a very, very, very limited, very cosmetic change that has been implemented, which is that one street that becomes pedestrianized and paved with acres of red sandstone, which I... Absolutely. We were using much more red sandstone than the Mughals ever used. Why are we doing that? They never paved their roads with sandstone. But anyhow, but what I'm just saying is that really we have not given any thought to how these, and when I look at Chandni Chowk and I see that one old Haveli has been broken down, and what you have is something which is, and this is right in front of that main square, which is used to be Chandni Chowk, is now the Town Hall Wala Square. If you look at it, there is in that corner one black box, which is clearly just a storage facility. It's just storage. Can you imagine, in the middle of an important historic square, this was the Chandni Chowk that Jahanara designed, and you have one block which has not a single, it's not a single window or anything, it's not even a residential, it's just a storage block. Can you imagine, can you think of, and I look at these people and I say, you are sitting on assets, and that is another thing that I want to say, that these heritage spaces are assets, which should be seen as assets. I mean, even if you're looking just at the bottom line, those who own these, if they were only given some amount of encouragement and a vision that these are, every one of those Havelis, it's heritage character which is an asset, which should be developed, rather than become some this is the downgradation that is happening.
Absolutely. And I mean, you've been looking at monuments across the country, forgotten monuments that people outside that local community don't even know about in India Lost and Found. I'm going to ask you a question. Is this degradation that's happening just pure carelessness on our part? Is it that, are we going to lose our heritage just because we are stupid and careless?
No. So the reason why India Lost and Found was born was this understanding that the definition itself that we're sort of taking out there to people as to what is the significance of all this is flawed. And so I'll just give you an example. When you say historic buildings, and I'm so sorry because you're a historian, and it means history and architecture. And so what happens is you have to, which I consider, I'm an English honors student that I consider, that history was wrongly called a liberal art. So you have two orthodox subjects defining what these buildings stand for. So I give people an example so that this collective of what India Lost and Found is, which is currently about 400 volunteers strong, most of them are students, is that I give them an analogy is to go think about your own ancestral home and think about all the things that you remember about it, if you have one. And it's amazing because when they run that cycle and they look at the smells, the sounds, the interactivity, the characters, then they get a sense of how to define it, because that's naturally happening to them, and then they develop that and they come across that sense of attachment. And I say, now take this and start looking upon other buildings and saying, how can I put this quantity in that building? And I can do it. And that's the birth of India Lost and Found. And that's what, Swapna is an expert on India Lost and Found, and so are many others. But currently, a lot of youngsters are sort of adding true value to this system as well. And, interestingly, like, I don't know when my home was built, but does it hamper my association with it? No. I mean, there are so many of these ephemeral things that, these little things that make for that, tangible, intangible quantity, that's what I bind with. And so I think that's that. If that was sorted out, we'd be a lot more caring towards all these traditions.
Yeah. And moving the heritage away from the tangible built heritage, right, into the other thing that is actually also potentially, right, changing, right, and I won't say getting lost or improving, is changing, is the intangible heritage of performing arts, for example, right, whether you take music or you take dance or many of these, and that by itself is also changing, and things are, like, the ball singers are pretty much gone. There are hardly any of them left, right? But even if you take dance, right, on it, or you take music, right, is electronic music better or worse? Depends upon who's the listener. It's some people will find it better, others people will not, right, on it. So who's to say what is better? But is there something about the intangible heritage, Alison, about how do you preserve the quality of the intangible performing arts, right, on it, when there is progress of technology and likes and attention spans are all changing?
Gosh, that's so many things in one question there.
Yeah.
I think India is really good at doing this. Actually, I think we have a lot to learn. I mean, if you think about, I was at Durga Puja last year, and the Chow dancing, I think it's called Chow, is it? And then you look at the Hornbill Festival, which is still the traditional music and dance, but there's also an electronic element to it, or a rock element to it, I think. So I think India's quite good at innovating and changing and evolving and responding to its audiences and making sure that those traditions are preserved, but it doesn't mean that everything in the past is always good, and that everything should be preserved, and everything will evolve and change and move on and develop. And I think the key thing is just to try and ensure that those platforms remain, that we can demonstrate the contribution of festivals or performing arts engagements to local communities, that we can quantify those in economic terms for people who think that's important, that we can quantify them in terms of how it makes people feel and how it contributes to well-being and a sense of identity. And so it's thinking about ways that we measure and describe and articulate the benefits in different ways as well. Mm-hmm. But also not always assuming that everything that's called heritage is good, inherently good.
Okay. And I know you have a view on this.
Yes,
yeah.
I would like to also bring a little bit of my views in here. Unfortunately, I'm a bit less optimistic than Alison for spending about 10 years doing Kathak dance here in Delhi. So, and I attended many performances, especially the first years, because you just walk in, it's free, and it's a great level. It was just wonderful. Coming from Europe, you never see that. Mm. So now what did I observe? There are about 500, okay, if you're generous, 1,000 people that, turn around these performances. The rest, when I would tell my friends who are not from the Kathak community that they do Kathak dance, they think it is Kathakali. So if you see, it's first of all male dance only, and then it's Carol, and it has nothing to do. So that is the situation. People don't connect in what I have experienced. Not this small group who is genuinely interested and attending, but 99.9 something % of people in India, they do not connect with the arts. And now we can ask ourselves why. So here I also see that sometimes when we want to preserve what we say like living heritage, it can be counterproductive. For example, I don't know if some of you have heard of Aditi Mangaldas, who is a very famous Kathak performer actually. And her approach to Kathak dance is innovative Kathak, where she would explore themes that are not in the regular syllabus. They are not Radha and Krishna stories. They would be completely different stories, but her language would be Kathak. And so a few years ago, I remember this story. She was offered an award. I don't remember, unfortunately, which award was that. But she was offered this award in the category of contemporary dance instead of Kathak dance. And then she refused it, and there was a long explanation and many articles written about it, where she would convey that to her, this is Kathak dance, which is being creative and which is being innovative. And now, if we don't allow for that, this is where we are disconnecting from people. They are not connecting because the stories of Radha and Krishna, it was very relevant some time ago, but most people, maybe, especially youth, will not connect to it in its original form. But it doesn't mean that if you step out of what you've seen from your gurus, that necessarily you betray the dance form. So how do you remain still an exponent of your art, but go much further? And one more thing, Sashanka, I wanted to share in this. So when we say that these storytellers, etc., they are dying out, so there is one big issue which is very difficult to compete with, which is technology, which totally mesmerizes us. For example, 50 years ago, my gurus would tell me that a Kathak festival would be throughout the night, and you have a very long program, maybe one artist 3 hours and another artist 3 hours, and everyone would come and cherish it because that's what you have in that month. That's your entertainment. Now you have TV, virtual reality, whatever, and it's true that it's very engaging. Just for us, we can't get out of our phone, right? It is engaging. So how in that realm, how do we still make these arts attractive? I think it's a real question we need to ask ourselves, because until we do as if that was not the case, we are missing this 99% of people who could also benefit from those arts.
And Amit, you're the obvious person to come in here. Is our performing arts going to become museum pieces with the photography of Avinash Pasricha having Birju Maharaj's expressions, and are those big blow-ups going to be what we remember of the art itself?
I fear for that future, but I do see that there's very little interest in those spheres, and in fact, Spiknike, which I thought was an excellent idea, of actually, taking it just beyond the performance. There should be more vigorous programs such as those, which allow people to connect with it on a level where they understand. It's not just, you take tribal dances for that matter. They were circular dances, and now they're stage performances. They've all been adapted, for this performative way. So how do you take all this and mold it back into, and get the community to actually feel that they're not just they're just giving it to this, doing something and getting everyone to participate in it. I think a lot more thought needs to go into these domains.
And so I'm going to bring you in to start, putting some of these threads together and looking at a few of these ideas. We've talked about how public spaces and private spaces are changing, and the interplay between public and private spaces is changing. How spaces for community interaction are dying away, and so therefore the spaces for the community to come together, have these performing arts is dying away. How technology, it's a given, it's with us, it's not going away in a hurry. Attention spans are becoming less, pressures are there, and so the space to have night-long Kathak performances that we all go to, right on it, is done out, right on it, that those are the realities of today, and whether one calls it progress or not progress, it's reality, right on. And so where do you see as the spaces for the preservation of this, right? How do we create not just museum pieces, but a living heritage of the tangible and intangible?
It's actually a very complex problem, and we have to, I think, to some extent, we have to just get used to the fact that some things we will lose. things like languages, the huge linguistic diversity that this country once was, is going. And things like, state, and some of those things are predicated on positive developments also. We're trying to increase literacy and make schooling compulsory, a certain minimum age. So all of those things do militate, against the preservation of little pockets of individual languages. So that is something that happens with the forging of bigger identities, your little ones. So there, of course, all we can do is hopefully just record that this existed at one point, and those will become museum pieces. I think we should also think of success in heritage, and some of the success that I see is in, and it's very uneven, but say some of our textile traditions, some of them are extremely successful, right? But then which direction are they taking? Because no tradition survives without evolution. Of course, it has to evolve if it is to be meaningful. I think Olga made a very good point about Kathak, that it has to, there is an attempt to ossify. I see a very different thing happening in the craft sphere, where there is evolution to the extent that sometimes that individuality of that craft is completely lost. So a little bit of dialogue as to which direction you evolve in. You still have to be true to the spirit of that particular craft tradition while you go forward. You can't be all over the place. I see now there is something called a Banarsi Patola. What is that? They've taken, it cannibalizes a particular art tradition. And so those are the kind of things that are happening. So on the one hand, success also has. I think
I get exactly where you're coming from. And Alison, that's part of what you do every day, right? On it, part of what you do every day is how do you encourage and preserve and protect these kind of spaces. And what do you think? Are you optimistic, pessimistic? How do you see this space evolving of living heritage? Is it all going downhill?
I'm an eternal optimist. Right? So I think, what we're trying to do is connect young people who have a thirst to understand each other better, to communicate and engage other people, and to build a better future or a better understanding in whatever way that might be. It could be contributing to a global issue like climate change, or it could be just building a better understanding of their own culture and identity if they're from the diaspora. So we try and build opportunities and enabling frameworks and spaces for young people to come together and to reinvent and to learn from past histories and stories and techniques and build something new. And that's, we have no end of young people who want to engage with us in those spaces and on those platforms. I think for us it's about making sure that those connections are meaningful, that they are not exploitative. I've said too many syllables there, but you know what I mean. That they are long-term and enduring and lasting, and that what they build is something that's potentially better than what was happening before, and also just trying to challenge each other and to learn, what I said before about not accepting that everything that's heritage or past is good. So, one example for me, I spent a lot of time in Varanasi when I first came to India in the 90s to learn Hindi, and spent a lot of time on the Ghats. And so now I'm reading a book called Fire on the Ganges. I don't know if any of you have read it, but Radhika Iyengar, she's a Charles Wallace India Trust Scholar, which is a scheme that we administer. And she's done this brilliant piece just observing and documenting the lives of the corpse burners on the Manikarnika Ghat. And that's a very strong, arguably, example of living heritage, right, of cultural heritage. But is that something that is sustainable? Is that something that is easy to do those communities have a choice? Do they have any options? Do they have a now? Who is it for me to say what is or isn't right? It's not really my culture. It's not. But I think we have to understand that there are ways that we can learn from the past and build on them and grow and move and evolve and progress and do something different, but without losing the essence of why some of those practices may exist in the first place.
And so, Olga, what are the lessons we've learned from the things we've done wrong and the things we've done right, read on it in Asia and Europe? How do we build these unique cities of the future? How do we build the cities where living heritage is a strong part of our daily life?
Lessons that we've learned, I think the best we can say we're in the process of learning. So something that I observe and which, to an extent is surprising, but actually it's not so much maybe. For example, if you look at the car-oriented cities, that was the trend in the West in the 50s. And now we see that this is what Asia is building. So when you were earlier asking me of how we build those cities where people interact, well, we are not building because we are still building flyovers in the middle of the city. For example, a former mayor of Barcelona once told me that out of 97 flyovers in Barcelona, they left only 3. They removed them. But in Asia, we are going the opposite way. So somehow, when we could already see what was the negative impact and do different, it could have happened, but this is not happening. And there are reasons for that as well. And one of them, I think it plays a critical role, is the perception of what we think is modern. So even if you take Hindi, there is this, interesting like kacha pakka houses. So pakka is like, okay, great, and it's cement. But if, for example, I was associated with Antak at some point, and we worked with the city of Chanderi, which is the city of traditional sari weavers, and so these people traditionally lived in earth-based houses, which would give them great thermal comfort. And so now, it was a few years ago when we had this project and we went there and we saw that as soon as a family has money, they would demolish that house and build this concrete box of cement, where later they are no longer comfortable because now the weaving loom cannot stand there properly, so they need to rent a space to work somewhere else. Now suddenly it's hot inside because they cannot pay for air conditioning and the house is not making it. But socially, okay, I've upgraded. So that mentality which focuses you on what you think is good for you, but actually once you experience it, it's not, but it's usually too late to come back, that becomes a big hindrance to us. But and this is maybe where we would work. So I remember in Chanderi, when I saw this, like massively that kind of a mentality, then speaking to some people, I said, but do you know that in Europe, the old houses are the most expensive and the most cherished? And they were, no, you're joking, it's not the case. They couldn't believe it, because for them, it's a completely different, perception. So if we, in creative ways, if we started interacting with people and then conveying what would be the value, even the comfort, let alone historical aesthetic value, but even your own comfort, before you make a certain choice, you should know, what is going to lead to. So I think that is one thing. And now, coming to that very interesting question, Shashank, you asked about building unique cities of the future. So that's something to which we dedicate our time on how you do that. And in fact, we came up with a process where what we call you decode the DNA of your city, like what are the unique aspects of your city combined. And based on that, how can you build the city based on your unique strengths and also addressing your challenges? And one of the elements, I'll give an example, there's very few examples are there, but one which I really love is the example in the city of Doha in Qatar. So the Meshreb Foundation founded a 3-year-long study, research, on what is the Qatari language of architecture in its core principles. meaning that we are not looking into how heritage houses were built and then trying to do the same, but just understanding what are these principles and how they can live out today. So at the end of this exercise, they created guidelines that they distributed to about 100 architects to build an area which is very close to the heritage area, close to the ocean front as well, in the core city, where you had to respect them, but otherwise you do whatever you want. And it became quite an interesting place. If you are in Doha, please visit. It's called the Meshreb downtown, which is pretty much the only walkable area. In fact, they even removed the cars. You have to park them. So then now it's Qatar. So they have a parking lot of 6-7 levels below the ground. So of course, I'm not saying that can happen in any Asian city. But then, because they made streets narrower, you could have that kind of, natural cooling from the shadowing, and they paid attention to the sun patterns, to the wind patterns coming from the ocean. It seems basic, but now who is caring? No? So that, and then the architectural patterns. So when you look at it, each house looks unique, but then it's also an ensemble. So you're not feeling like things came out of the blue, and it doesn't look like they're heritage buildings because you have that heritage area just nearby, so you can see it's very different. But yet it doesn't look like these, sleek high-rises you see in Shanghai or Hong Kong, etc. So to me, that's the way forward, experimenting in the place, understanding what is it that you have and how you can innovate based on what people are looking for in that place today. So that, of course, also you need to learn and understand.
I think this is a great time to take some questions from the floor, and then I'm going to come back to all of you for thoughts to wind it up. So anybody got a question that you'd like to ask from the panel? Yes, sir. Can we have a mic somewhere there, please? In the front here, please.
I think we all realize that the heritage earlier was inspiring. Whatever we were building, whether they call it living heritage or tangible or intangible, it was inspiring. What we're doing currently perhaps is not, at least in some parts of the world. So what are the issues? Is it economics? Is it the values? Is it the process? Is it poor aesthetics? What is it?
Who's going to take that? Yeah. Yep. Go ahead. Yeah. Olga and Swapna, maybe both of you can take it. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead, Olga.
Olga, please.
Yes. So I think, as I was mentioning at some point before, one of the big shifts, actually two big shifts that have happened, you can say, around World War II, but starting with Industrial Revolution. One is that now we can rely on electricity to fix what we haven't properly designed, which was not the case before. So instead of using passive design, you just switch on the AC and you don't mind. Another matter that we have a climate change issue and how much emissions that produces, but okay. That, and second, that instead of smaller players, we tend to have big players. And the logic is, yes, and third thing is globalization, that now the company is not catering, for one specific city, but now it's a worldwide real estate development company, and you just have certain projects designed. It becomes very easy to just reproduce, and of course it's going to cost less. So you just want to optimize your profits, and it's easier when you just take these shortcuts. And this is where I believe there is a need of public opinion. So I was talking earlier about the government, but there is there are a number of philosophers, creative artists who also talk about the right of a person to live in an aspiring environment. And we don't talk about it enough, because most of us, we don't even think that we have this right. We see what is there available and we try to buy a flat or rent a flat from whatever we have. But what if we actually voiced out and said, no, it is not acceptable that, you have these, like boxes one to the other, you haven't even planted any greenery, and how do you expect me as a person to live in it? We don't have that kind of a stand, but I think we should also have, then maybe that will inspire the governments to, to take things differently.
Yep, absolutely.
Just a small point. I mean, maybe it's something also to do with curricula and education and the values that we attach to creativity through education, and perhaps more focus on helping young people see creative career pathways and understand the benefits of more holistic approaches to some of these things.
Questions? Gentleman here.
Hi, good evening. That was a great talk. I feel living heritage has got a lot to do with communities. It's not that we haven't had success stories in our country. If we're speaking architecture, you've had incredible buildings created by Laurie Baker, which is essentially rooted in our vernacular architecture. You've had Charles Collier create incredible stuff all around. The success stories that we've had, my sense is when we've involved the communities in what is happening there. Whether it is the revival project in Jodhpur, you had this Paoli, which was a complete dump, and nobody did anything until you involved the communities around. So I think somewhere there has to be this need to tell the interlopers. That's a very nice word that there's a book that I'm reading, this called Margin Lands, which I was at an event of. There, this author talks about the interlopers that have come into our traditional knowledge systems. So whether it is the Raika in Jodhpur or it is the Bhopa in the Pichoi tradition that you have. So somewhere there has to be some policy making where communities need to be involved, and somewhere they're being marginalized. And I think that is essential in terms of getting them into the act. And the moment you give them ownership, things will survive, things will prosper. So I think that.
Thank you. Very interesting point. Would you like to react to that?
Yes, of course. I mean, it's very difficult, however, to get to give that direction also, because particularly when you look at how society changes. I look at, for instance, Delhi's urban villages. What has happened to them? That's not a community anymore. There were, for instance, I give one example of Chirag Delhi. Chirag Delhi is a lovely village till about 15 years ago, 15, 20. Time seems to just collapse in my mind. But maybe 15, 20 years ago, it still had the feel of a village. The inside, just in front of the dargah, there's a large tree still there. There were people used to just spread out their charpais over there, and that was a place, an open space, community space. The community itself, I mean, this is not some great planning agency or anything, has decided first to use it as a parking lot, then slowly build around the tree what used to be a chabutra with somebody spreading out one cloth on which they sold some vegetables, have now slowly became a little shack, and then now become pakka shops there, right? So you see, a community itself has decided to completely eliminate that open space in favor of individual greed for space. And maybe those are constraints. People need that space, and therefore they've eaten into the community space to build a little individual, parcel it out like that. So, yeah, maybe it can work, but it needs some sort of direction.
So when I said the involvement of the community, I mean, it needs to extend to what Alison said in terms of educating.
Yeah.
It needs to be very comprehensive. You can't just have a...
Absolutely.
Yeah. Can I say?
Yeah, please.
I think there's also something about maybe incentivization as well, and some external factor creating that desire or need for change, and that could be regulations, like Olga was saying. It could be like in the UK, and I saw this in Ahmedabad, in the old city in Ahmedabad recently, where the government can provide grants for restoration restoration of heritage. So that's a good incentivization. So in the UK, you can buy an old heritage property very cheaply, but you can get a government grant to restore it. You have to restore it in the way that you agree with the government, but you have to open your property once a month to the public, for example. So, but then there's also like community spaces, like Swapna was saying. So in Mumbai, we did we worked with a local community in Govindi, I think it was called, where we did a rap hip-hop festival with local communities. They took over a parking lot, and at the end of the festival, the government gave them the lot as a permanent space to use for their festival. So some sort of external...
Absolutely.
Yeah, incentive.
Okay, questions? Yeah.
This question's actually to the entire panel. We've spoken about, agree completely with a lot of interesting points that came up. We haven't spoken about AI. We have spoken, Swapna, about communities and communities needing to be guided. Who's going to guide AI when they decide to demolish something or build or preserve, right? I'll give you a personal example. I grew up in a house which had its gates on Haley Road and flanked by Curzon Road, which was renamed to Kasturba Gandhi. It was demolished. It was bought by the Tatars and then demolished. It was obviously a heritage building, and the only thing that cannot come up there is a high-rise. But the government or ASI and whoever else, very knowledgeable people who look after that area of the heritage in Delhi, didn't think that it needed to be preserved. It was obviously from the distant past when the British were here. And now when we put all of this and make AI the custodian, I wonder what's going to happen. Any of you?
How's AI going to affect heritage? Read on it.
Well, my thing is that, AI is only going to further what we do because it's going to learn from us. So I don't particularly sort of see that as being more disruptive than we are. We're disruptive enough, actually. Yeah. So,
skates now.
Your case also, but the thing is, like I also on Hanuman Road, I also have a heritage house, but it's all dying on its own. It's a really old house, but I think Swapna also put it that we're going to lose quite a bit of it anyway, and we have to reconcile that we got so much. And as when it comes to built heritage, I remember sitting with the director monuments at ESI, and he was scratching his head and he was saying, I think we shouldn't dig these up, let them be there, they're best preserved underground. There's so much heritage sitting there, they haven't dug up, we don't want to dig up. So.
Yeah. Okay, questions? Any question? Front here, gentleman here, then we'll come. Okay, there's a mic there, yeah, please. And after that, we'll come here.
AI can be seen in the larger aspect of social media, etc. So, for instance, Instagram, right? So, we're talking about these 2-3 second waves of dopamine that comes along with reels and everything and attention spans. But I certainly feel if a monument solely conserved, and right, people are clicking likes on it, people are discussing about it, they're having a chat about it. So Asad also said there has to be a sense of community, right? There is dialogue going on. I've seen it on Reddit, whether it's on being on the opposite side of things, whether it's not being preserved. And actually, we tend to think at times that preservation and progress are on the opposite ends of the spectrum, right? But it is actually the intersection of them happening in the social media space, which is very much the public space right now. I think it captures a lot of our lives, which is actually a very optimistic way. So I only have this point to add that it's actually going in a positive way for me. And what the mind is, I would love to hear that as well. So yeah, thank you.
I have a feeling Amit should be answering this, but I'm just going to get in there and say that you are so right. about this, in the sense that particularly when it comes to things like discovering monuments, going and photographing them, or finding out more about the heritage in your neighborhood, what is special about it, finding the stories in them, finding places which look interesting, all of that. The fact that you can now share it on social media, it's a good thing. It incentivizes a lot of people. The people will go and take photographs, and we may, fogies like me might find it a little annoying sometimes, but that's it. It's a good thing. The people want to go and
especially, ma'am, seeing Delhi in a sense of an archaic way. It's like so new, so refreshing, that it feels really, really good on here.
Right.
Everyone feels good about like hanging around Lodi Garden or any other place for that matter. Like, we are Gen Z, so we see it through that lens.
Yeah.
So it's great.
Yeah.
Can only Amit, and then we'll take Addison and Olga.
I had no idea that we were with India Lost and Found that so many of these youngsters would be so enthusiastic. So exactly what your point is. I mean, the kind of interest we get of interaction of people. I've got Indonesian students. I've got Canadians, I've got Indians in America participating. They're all congregating and they're all producing content which we are going to put together. And this is all because they're all fascinated by what there is to discover.
Yeah. Addison.
Yeah, I mean, I see positive change in the way that AI is being used increasingly in sustainable fashion and textiles. The fact you can scan a QR code and see where the textile was made, what the provenance, who made it, what community they're from, what technique they used. I think that's going to be a really positive change in the future. We've just done a study on the role of AI in language learning in the future, and I think what we're seeing from that is that it's likely to enable people to learn the fundamentals and the basics more easily or more quickly, or rely on AI to help them communicate, but it's going to enable a focus on learning specialist language or language for specialist domains and specialist needs, potentially enable you to, imagine this is a true story, you have someone who's from a French-speaking community with an Arabic, as a bilingual Arabic speaker, your grandmother speaks Arabic, you speak French, your children end up speaking English, AI will help you be able to communicate with your grandmother. So I think there's a lot of positive benefits that it will bring.
Okay.
Yes, and I would like to add to this that if you talk about building organically unique cities, so why do I say organically? Because you can also build some kind of crazy high-rise in the middle of the desert, but it's not relevant by any respect. But then if we used AI as a tool which help us to generate options, because one of the issues, as we were discussing now with the first question also, is that there is a certain cost that big developers try to avoid. So now if you try to cut on this cost, and you input into the AI, so okay, these are my local conditions, or maybe even study the local conditions, local climate, local topography, etc., and now provide me options, and these are my traditional architectural patterns, this and that, and then you give it the right prompts, and you say, now generate what could be this building of the future, this street of the future. And it gives you options. And we are getting there. For the moment, I'm interacting with architects who are using it. It's not perfect yet, but it starts getting quite interesting. So maybe I would want to imagine that maybe it actually helped us giving these options, and then we choose, we discuss them in communities, and then we input more, specific prompts, and then AI helps us. Maybe that will bring down the cost of actually building places that are unique, to each particular place. I would want that to happen.
Thank you. Questions? Let's have the gentleman here, and
actually, I would like to give some statements. First of all,
so questions, please, not statements. Yeah.
Let me. From those statements, I want some.
Let's keep it brief, sir, if we can, because there are a number of people who want to ask. So, yeah.
First of all, understanding the definition of heritage. That will change a geographical area to geographical area based on the civilization standards. And some areas it is economical perspective, the intentions are. Some areas it's a beliefs. So in this context, for example, European, if we can take in Italy, that Colosseum still they are making, and still they are flood of tourists. Okay, but we don't know that heritage still exists because I visited physically. So still they are making some kind of repairs and doing that thing for the open for the tourists. That is the intention. And second, here in India, what is my understanding, the religious kind of beliefs, the heritage, the temples and all. So it is place to place, it may vary, and also the intentions behind this. And my point is that how long we can keep heritage, because this world is designed for sometimes destruction. Okay, that's why new things were built. Maybe now we are in the capturing the photographs. Maybe in the future the heritage will be lies in the virtual mode for the next generations. Okay, we need to think a lot in this to balancing that between preservation and progress. Maybe instead of wanting physical, maybe we are shifting for the virtual, might be. That is my point.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone want to react to the fact that we should let it die out and keep the virtual?
I must say I don't agree with your proposition that in India it is religion is, our heritage is subsumed in the religious, because we have many dimensions to heritage, and we've just been talking about some of them, whether it is the ways of building cities, whether it is crafts, whether it is performance traditions, and religion is just one aspect of it. So there are so many different ways, and it is not just heritage is not something that is consumed. Heritage is something that is hopefully lived. It's a part of your, it would not make any sense if it was kind of separated from our lives and something out there that we could consume. So,
that's thank you. So we'll take a question here, then the lady at the back, and the lady here.
So my limited understanding is that successful cases of culture preservation, especially built culture, are essentially independent projects which have been executed discretely or separately. So I'd just like to maybe get your opinion, how do we do this, or how do we do this thing of culture preservation, for the lack of a better word, at scale, and not at discrete projects?
How do we do it at scale? Who'd like to take that?
So sorry, you didn't get that.
So the question really was that successful examples of where heritage has been preserved or restored have been micro cases, right? How does one do something like this at scale?
If I may.
Please.
I think it's to do with our mindset, it's to do with our education. We just don't think like that. We haven't, and particularly, policies, government policies, municipal policies, all these, I'm talking about built heritage now, but you can expand that to go into areas like performing arts and so, state policy, state patronage and all still does matter quite a lot, and affects all sorts of things from education to how city plans are made. So until that everybody begins to think like that, I don't see it happening. One-off examples happen because there are a few committed people who take up a particular project and then work at it at all odds and do it, which is a very unhelpful way of doing it.
I'll emphasize that against all odds they do it.
Yes.
Okay, we'll take the question from the lady at the back.
May I just,
Olga first and then the question. Yeah.
Yes. No, I want to insist on the role of regulations, because really if you want to do it at scale, it's not possible to leave it at the will. For example, in India, I was shocked when I learned about the heritage regulations. So essentially, I think less than 1% of actual heritage buildings are protected. at both national, state, and local level. The rest doesn't matter. In Chanderi, I was seeing a 300-year-old house just getting demolished in front of my eyes. It's okay. It's not protected. So now, very quickly, an example that I think was extremely successful is Italy. So Italy, after the World War II, there was a big movement. Mindset movement of trying to copy the US. Like now you would throw away the old furniture of your grandmother and try to buy these like modern sofas you see on soap operas from the US, etc. And so some people gathered in the 60s and created lobby groups to actually protect the built heritage. And that there was a long process, I won't delve into it, but in about 10 years it led to national regulations which said that historic cores should be preserved, but not only that, the new buildings built in there should also not undermine the value of the existing buildings. And then from there resulted a number of programs that would support, incentivize of how actually you rebuild them, because some was some heritage was degraded, some was also damaged by the war partially. So but that made Italy now the country which is most visited in the world. So maybe in France we have a few cities that everyone would visit, but in Italy pretty much any city you go to, you get that. So that kind of wheel, there is no way around it if you want to do it at scale. Of course, pockets will happen. And same as you were saying also, yes, we do have wonderful examples of very kind of context-based creative architecture even today. But then if we want to do it at scale, then again we need to take other measures. Otherwise we depend on those few people who take initiative, and when I walk in a city, it's still hell in most of the places, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Question from Mike.
It's not a question, just this thing. Sorry for putting it here, but please let me do this. See, Gaza has become heritage. UN and UNESCO is living but dead. Israel is living, and Palestine has become heritage. So when we talk about living heritage, I think we should talk more about what is the most challenging aspect we are facing today, not what has happened and what will happen through AI and other things, because these are most challenging aspects. Let me remind you all that this world has faced in recent times.
Yeah, so we can't bring geopolitics into every topic.
You
so
can take this question.
No, so
I don't want any answer.
No, sir, but we are not bringing geopolitics into a different topic that we're discussing right now.
Geopolitics.
Well, so I don't even want to get into a debate with you on it. Right, Amit? Question. Yeah.
I actually had a question which Olga partly answered, about the gentleman mentioned the Colosseum, and you had mentioned, Swapna, about the defacement of Chandni Chowk, right? So I had gone to Rome, and I had happened to go to one of these villages which are so well preserved, and I was speaking to the historian and we were walking with them. And what struck me was that they had actually done a study on how many people that area can support. So each house, how many people, how many physically living people can it actually support. And they spoke to the community and they said that, look, there was state patronage, like you said. And they actually spoke about it, and they said that when this house exceeds this limit of 5 living people or 4, the 6th has to move out. So whether the 5th moves out as well is a choice, but it's a very hard sort of a decision which the community took. But as a result, the Italian old villages, are thriving and they are open to public on specific days, and you can actually go and see how the old cities live. Can something like that be done in Chandni Chowk? Like, can something be done? Because those are also very, very similar.
Chandni Chowk is a very different thing altogether. If you go there in the daytime, go there at night, large parts are empty. No, it's empty because those houses are abandoned. a lot of those houses, actually, people don't live there anymore. It's hugely commercial, and that's for various historic reasons. But we have allowed the infrastructure to deteriorate to such an extent that anybody who can afford to move somewhere else moves. So, so I would say it's not that there are too many people. It's just that it is just a complete lack of vision of what makes the space special. You have not realized that what is the kind of, what is the morphology, as they call it, right, of those courtyard houses, the way of life, all of those things you have allowed to slip away. So that is the problem there. It's not the question of too many people. In fact, the number of people has come down, of people who live in, the municipal corporation has closed down many of its schools, for instance. That's a very good symptom of a falling population. So as people come, open their shops, busy during the day, and then they leave. Nobody has a stake in the place in that sense.
And my question to you was that how does one bring about a sense of, let's say, either reviving that place as not just a central commercial activity, but maybe as a living heritage, as a living space, and state patronage, how
right.
to bring that in community?
Yeah. So one of the things that was there, regulation. Very, very important. By we, I mean I was with INTAC for a number of years, and we worked on this project to put a nomination to UNESCO for World Heritage status for Shahjahanabad and New Delhi. And one of the things we said, this area needs to have specific developmental norms where you respect the morphology of those streets, of the footprint of those buildings. It's not just the heritage structures, and there are some 700 odd protected buildings over there. It's not just those buildings, it's what else you are building next to those buildings that matters very much too. So how you will develop it, those norms were never developed, so everybody builds any which way. That's the lack.
I think if you go deeper into this, of where this attitude is coming from, is when we speak about India, we speak about a developing country where there are many issues. So, I mean, at the surface, we can say we can't really blame the government, which needs to fight poverty, lack of access to healthcare, education, and then now there is heritage, which maybe is not seen a priority. But now, I think this is also happening because we don't see the value of that unique environment in terms of socioeconomics. And now what I'm seeing is that cities start, and that is going to enhance, in my view, losing their attractiveness just because they are common cities, you can see anywhere, and it's not that comfortable and that, pleasant to live. And then who is going to settle there in the end? Of course, people who don't have a choice, who are still in the kind of digital revolution era, like post-industrial, where they move from rural areas to urban areas to get some, low-paid jobs. It's still different. But for people who do have a choice, they pay very strong attention to the quality of life, to that, inspiration element. And so if the government is able to see ahead, how do I become a country where people want to live, which people want to visit? How come that India still has less foreign tourists a year than Singapore? This is shocking. And that is not because India has less heritage, in fact it has much more, but because your experience, whatever is around the site, is pretty much hell. Like after you walk out of Qutub Minar, then God helps you, in terms of how you're going to navigate the space. So you need to think of how you create that environment that uplifts you. And if you think that this is going to maybe, even immediate, there is low-hanging fruit also, but in the next 5, 10, 20 years, this is what is going to bring your country up on the world map, then maybe your perspective can change and you can attach more value to it. Until then, yes, of course, there are many priorities, and you can understand the government is, not putting their prime attention in that area.
Okay, I'm going to now wrap it up by asking all four of you, are you firstly, optimistic or pessimistic about what the scenario looks like? Are we going to lose it all, right, on it? Or are we headed for the great new revival? Or is the truth somewhere in between, right, on it? So I'm going to ask all of you to react to that. And also to comment, is there anything we can do individually, right, that can actually move the needle at all? Right,
I think the potential is incredible, because there's a lot that needs to be done, and like you pointed it out, and but like we all know, many things and factors have to come together, and it's not just one thing, education, but I think many things have to work together and this disruption which we're talking about in Old Delhi, whether you take hill stations, all of our hill stations are destroyed. You take coastal towns, take Goa for example, Panjim, you take Parsi colonies across the coast, you take so many of these habitats which aren't ancient, but they're really beautiful habitats. They're all disappearing at an amazing rate, because you take the Sikpur Havelis and they're demolishing, and the moment one high-rise comes up, that entire street would have changed in its look, and you can't, I don't know if you can unwind it, but that's another, that's a next lecture. But the thing is, displacement, migration, people, there's so many factors. I mean, many of these places are like Swapna was talking about, are empty. Like Sidhpur, they're all locked up. They come once a year for marriages, that's it. And then they go back again, and there's nobody to look after them, and they don't experience it. They don't like living there, but they just, because their roots are here, they come back. But so there are all these complex issues to sort of go through. But I truly feel that the power lies with the youth. And honestly, I mean, what I feel, and I tell everyone who walks into India Lost and Found, is that we're building heritage warriors. Because that's what we need. We need warriors. We need people who are going to stand up for this tomorrow. Not just, I mean, in my case, it's built heritage, but I mean, we need causes to run, and I'm horrified that we've got cities such as Gurgaon with no heritage zone, with no place for congregation, with no cultural space except maybe a museum camera or whatever. And it's shocking that we could build these huge, and that's a modern city that, I don't know, we're going to replicate across the country. And somebody needs to start talking about that, because where is that conversation around, culture going to happen? Where is that habitat center where we're sitting in right now?
After years of intact, after years of trying to get the government or government agencies to have that vision to make those regulations, and I've now come around to a situation where I really feel, again, like Amit, that we have to look to ourselves to say, how strongly do we feel about this to take this forward? And I think the kind of work that Amit is doing, talking to people, making them look a little differently. I think ultimately we have to try to begin to find, first of all, the will among ourselves, and maybe take it forward. And I do, and I think that maybe it will take time to change, and we will have a lot of disasters along the way, because the direction in which we are moving right now is not healthy. But I think change will come eventually when enough people start. I don't know. I'm, as I said, I'm kind of optimistic and I'm kind of not.
What about you, Alison? Kind of optimistic, kind of not?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's existential, isn't it? We have to be optimistic. We have to be sort of manifesting the future that we want to see, and because it's just so important. A bit cheesy, but now more than ever, we have to be enabling those stories and enabling those experiences to be shared, and understood, and we have to create those spaces. There's no other choice.
Olga, what do you think? Are we headed downhill very rapidly?
Rather than saying optimistic or pessimistic, I would say everything is in our hands, and things just get played minute by minute. So are we going fast enough? No, but then see, for example, if someone of you tomorrow, whichever day, just, thinks, oh, I'm actually entitled to an environment which is more inspiring than, what I'm seeing, and shares with someone who knows what this person will think, what this person will do. So whatever it is that we contribute, we don't know, we don't control fully, and that's great also, like where this is going to lead. So I think the active attitude is what is required, and we are shaping the future the best way we can.
Well, on that note, it leaves me to thank all of you for joining us this evening, and to all of you for patiently listening to us for the last bit of time. As always in Trendspotting, there are no answers, right? We just discuss a very nuanced topic, right? And we hope you got a better sense of the issues involved with living heritage as a result of this evening. And we look forward to seeing you next month, 3rd week of April. Trendspotting will be back. Thank you and good night.
Thank you so much.